What's up, YouTube? Today I'm going to be talking about, the psychology of money and basically why money rules people and why the government's so corrupt in its ways when it comes to money. So, as we all know, money is a currency that people use to buy goods and sell things. I have 100 right here, $100 bill. It's not really valuable in today's society, but money has always come a long way, ever since, the Fertile Crescent, the Roman Empire, they used coins, silver and stuff like that. But, money has always had a hold on people, and money has always been used to exploit people in, different types of ways. For example, the cost of living, especially in especially in today's economy, is crazy expensive. Single bedrooms may be like $1,200-$1,300. A 4-bedroom with 2 bathrooms, you're probably looking at like $1,900 to like $2,200. And that's the thing about modern society. They put so much emphasis on getting rich, and everybody wants to be a millionaire, but who are the millionaires? The millionaires are the people who are the top 1%, 0.5% of the population, but they control the other 99.5% of the population. Okay, so let's say 0.5% are the billionaires and the Illuminati and the higher ups, and then the 99.5% is us, middle class. Why is it that a man named Elon Musk has a net worth, I believe his net worth is about 900 billion now? Why should a single man have a higher net worth than his own home country of South Africa, who I believe their total GDP is about maybe 400 billion, 380 billion? Why should one man have that much power and control in society? Why is it hard for Americans to live? Why is it hard for Americans to find work? We're experiencing, a very astronomical unemployment rate in today's world. But that's also thanks to the way that, the job market's set up. Everything, I think the higher ups are trying to play something on us, us middle class citizens. Why is it that corporate greed and capitalism ruin people? That all these corporations get all this money, all the CEOs and the higher ups get these billions of dollars, but the workers who are busting their asses, to keep the cash cow flowing, why is it that they don't get a lot of money? And I've never understood that, but if you look all throughout history, there's always been some type of power imbalance. In the Roman Empire, you had kings and queens, or, emperors, I meant, you had, like Caesar Augustus, you had Julius Caesar, you had, like Marcus Aurelius. You had all these men in the Roman Empire who had all this power and all this notoriety, and it's crazy to me because, the majority of society just wants to be happy. Why is it that we as a society have to go to work 5 days a week for 40 hours, bust our asses off, and not even see our family and kids? Why is it like that? Who designed a system to where Americans are basically slaves in modern times? Modern day jobs are the epitome of slavery, in a sense. And you have so many young people, especially in my generation, because I'm Gen Z. I was born in 2006. So you have a lot of people in my generation who just feel lost in life. They don't know what to do. And, the economy's to blame. The wars are to blame. AI is on the rise. AI is, rapidly replacing jobs. And, most Americans can't make ends meet, Why is it that, a single mom has to work 2 jobs, 60 plus hours a week, barely spending time with her kids just to put food on the table? Why is healthcare so expensive? Why are things run by money? Run by this? Run by Benjamins and millions of dollars, the U.S. puts billions of dollars into other countries' problems, but what about us? And that's the thing that gets me, man, is like money at the end of the day is truly worthless. I have no idea, why people, have the emphasis to want to be rich. Because you're not going to carry that to the grave, You're not going to carry, riches to the grave. Everybody dies and they leave the same amount. Nothing. So, again, this video, I just wanted to talk about how money ruins society and, the psychology of money. Let me put him out of the hand. And, the psychology of why money controls people. Money separates people and their families. Because, family members can be so greedy and dependent on money that they lack genuine empathy. Money, I'm no longer a Christian, but the Bible says that the love of money is the root of all evil. And, First Timothy 6. And people truly love this money. Everything is about money. All these Americans are worrying about if they have enough money in their bank account. Everybody's worrying if they have enough money to get food to eat, if they have enough money for, therapy, if they have enough money for, keeping the lights on in the house with kids, And it shouldn't be, at this point where, people can make billions of dollars doing TikTok or doing all these different challenges and trying to get rich the easy way when 97.5% of Americans are struggling. Most people work paycheck to paycheck. Most people don't own businesses. Most people aren't homeowners. Most people pay rent, especially here in Buffalo. I'm in Riverside right now, Riverside Park, and the majority of people around here, in this area where I grew up for years, they came from the gutter, I know some people in the projects, who've they've never had enough growing up. And it's just unfortunate, the situation of this country, the situation of this world, and, it just makes me hurt for the people out there that really depend on money. But other people are being greedy and taking all the money. You shouldn't have to work 2-3 jobs just to get money. Why is it like this? I've had so many questions and so many doubts about if this world is even real or not. Because, again, I'm going to go into a different, subject now. Bear with me. But, it seems like the majority of people in society are just, dead inside. Like they have no emotion. They have no emotional regulation. They have no personality. It seems like so many people, who are my age especially, between, 18 to 25, all of these kids and all of these people, even adults, they want to fit in to these societal standards that are imposed on them. They want to have sex like crazy. They want to, do all these drugs and do all these things to look cool. But, you know, I don't know why people are afraid to be different, you know. It's almost like being different is weird. And I've always struggled with being different. I have ADHD. I've always been, I've not been good at social cues. I've not been good at, talking to people in general. And, I just feel like everybody has something going on. Everybody has some type of depression. Everybody has some type of stress about money, about family issues. Everybody has something. It's always something. And I noticed this too. People nowadays, they don't look happy. They look miserable. Like it's almost like the joy is snuffed out of them. Like you could go to Walmart, you could go to any store, just everybody just looks like they're not wanting to exist. And again, I feel like money, plays an important role in that, because money, they say that money equals happiness. People, they want millions of dollars, they want money. If they see $100 bill on the ground, see how happy they get. But money is a temporary thing, money is a temporary problem. And again, I feel like the majority of society, is distracted when it comes to these things, especially when it comes to money. Because I've seen it with my cousin, he took advantage of my money. He claims to be an evangelist, but he lets money govern him more than he lets his God govern him. And what about these mega church pastors? They want to get rich, they pocket the money. Why is it that the man of God has 2 private jets, a multi-chrome SUV, the nicest suit jackets you can think of, the nicest Breitling watches, the nicest chains. But yet the people who are in the congregation are struggling. They're struggling to pay their bills. They're struggling to take care of their children. They're struggling to, find a reason to see things positive. And organized religion especially, they take advantage of the vulnerable. They take advantage of people who don't have everything figured out. And, that's how they pocket the money. But, it's just an unfortunate thing, that most of society goes through. It's just, if I had money, bro, I would give it away. This is worthless. Currency is worthless. You want to know what's true and you want to know what's pure? Love for your family and love for your friends. That's what matters. Everybody else around here, again, is trying to chase, these material things. And again, I don't understand why people want these material things, but they don't want love. They don't want, to have an open mind. Some of these people who are money hungry or who have a need for currency are some of the most money hungry people you can imagine. These people tear down their family. These people don't, like good company. These people, disrespect their parents. These people push everybody in their way out. They push everybody. And I won't let money consume me, because I believe life has more value than any currency. But again, I don't know why this world, and especially, these societal expectations, pushes so much. It's everywhere, You can't live a normal life without currency. You need money in every type of aspect, to pay your bills, to pay, for your car insurance, to pay for food. Water costs money. It wasn't like this, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. And the inflation too in this country is out of proportion. You know, all these groceries and all, you know, gas is going up. You know, all these prices are literally skyrocketing, you know, and that's just capitalism. And that's, you know, the consumers consuming the products, and that makes the people behind the capitalist companies more successful. You know, like look at Amazon. Amazon is worth hundreds of billions of dollars, you know. You know, they have same-day delivery. They have all these things. You know, they have all these drivers, but, you know, I heard it's a pretty bad job to work. You know, that it's not fair, you know, that they don't get paid, you know, decently for the work they're doing. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos pockets all the money. Why is that? You know, why is it that people in society, especially the higher ups, just don't give a fuck about everybody else? They're selfish, they're greedy, you know, they want total control of people. You know, they want to silence anybody who speaks out, anybody who has, you know, actual critical thinking. And again, it honestly doesn't even make sense to me. You know, I wasn't asked to be born into this world, but guess what? I'm here, you know, I'm in this fucked up world, and I'm gonna try to make the most of it by being the most selfless person, trying to help, you know, the most people I could help, you know, not idolizing money, not trying to tear people down, you know, because of money. And again, this video is about the psychology of money, why money in of itself consumes people. So again, you know, just keep your eyes up. Honestly, keep your eyes on God. I know I said I'm an agnostic theist, but I still do hold to, you know, God. But, you know, just keep striving, keep, you know, trying to, you know, save your money. You know, keep trying to stack your bread, and, you know, don't let total greed control you in this fucked up world. So again, this is just another video. I just wanted to spread some truth. So, you know, if you guys like it, you know, like it, subscribe, you know, check out my other shit. And until then, peace out.